Alright, let me just wait for everything to click into place and then we can get started. So give it a quick second. Hopefully. Okay, yeah, should be fine, let me make sure that it's, well, okay, perfect. Everything is working. All right, so welcome to the welcome to the sixth and final Palming Livestream Lecture series. So we are going into a palm that everyone knows about, and that is the diagonal palm shift, or otherwise known as the DPS. It is a very mechanically interesting palm because the card is palmed from the center, and you just sort of see it swivel into position, right? Which is really interesting because there's a couple of pivot palms out there, but it's interesting to just see something. There's just something more about this because this card rotates a lot more versus other pivot palms like the Browy top palm, where it's just a very, very slight pivot. So this is like genuinely a swivel and not just like a very simple pivot, let's just say, right? So throughout this video, I'll be discussing its basic history, the original handling, sort of, right? Along with my preferred way of doing the DPS and some tips as well. So without further ado, let's get into the basic history behind the DPS, or the diagonal palm shift. I mean, at this point, do we even need to know more about the DPS and its history? It's so simple, right? Because as we all know, the diagonal palm shift, or the DPS, comes from SW Erdnäs's The Expert at the Card Table. I don't know why I butchered that, from 1902. So that's pretty much it for the DPS. That was the first time that it was actually put into publication. But it turns out that the DPS actually has other roots as well, and that is a move known as the diagonal pass. So that move, so the diagonal pass, comes from sleight of hand back in 1885. So there's quite a bit of time in between of the DPS and the diagonal pass. So in Sleight of Hand 1885 by Edwin Sachs, the diagonal pass is this really weird move because it's sort of like a 3-card multiple shift, and you would just sort of have it like swivel out, or somehow I don't really know, or I don't really understand the description all that much, which, I mean, I should, because I'm researching this, but sometimes you just don't understand it, right? But that's enough of the diagonal pass. What you just need to know is that the diagonal palm shift has its roots in the diagonal pass. But funnily enough, there is a move that is basically the same thing as the DPS in the 3rd edition of Expert Card Technique by Frederick Browy and why am I blanking on his name? G. Newgard, there we go. Oh my god, I'm so sorry. But in the 3rd edition of that book, which includes additional entries by Di Vernon and Dr. Jacob Daly, there is a move called the left hand side steal, and it's basically the same exact mechanics as the DPS. The only difference is that it was actually done from a spectator peek, so the spectator would do it from a peek. So you would actually just have a card selected by peek, and then you would do the DPS from there by enlarging the break, and that would be the left-hand side steal, right? The description that Erdnäs puts in Expert at the Card Table, the DPS is actually done through an insertion, like so. All right, so that is basically the only difference between the two moves. The only big difference is how the card is selected and returned into the deck. So before we get into the move, we'll talk about get readies, right? Because if you don't know how to do a get ready, then you won't know how to get into the move, right? So generally, as long as you have an in jog or an angle jog, you will be able to do the move, right? If I have an in jog over here, let's just say, for example, if I have an in jog, if my right hand just comes over and kicks this card off to the right, I can then execute the DPS as per usual, right? So it really doesn't matter how you get this in jog. As long as you have this in jog, you will be able to do the DPS. right? So yeah, right? But I'll tell you all the methods to really get into the DPS itself. So the first one is the insertion, which is the preferred method of Erdnase. I already have a video on the diagonal jog, so you can go ahead and check that out, but I'll go through it relatively quickly over here. So you're holding the deck in your left hand, a normal dealer's grip. So your left middle finger is near the top right corner, and your thumb is near the top left corner, like so, but they're right below of it, like so, okay? Your right hand approaches this selection that is outjogged in the center of deck, and the middle finger contacts the upper left corner of the selection, like so. Your other fingers are just going to relax, which gives room for this card to actually just kick over. So because your right hand is actually at a diagonal, the moment this card you push this card into the deck, this card will rotate around and be kicked off at an angle. Okay? So that is the diagonal jog. And if you don't want this corner to flash, you can just use your left ring finger and right ring finger and pinky finger to kick this card into the front of the deck, and you'll still have an angle jog, like so. Okay, so that is just the basic mechanics of the diagonal jog. Again, the info card will be up here by the time the live stream ends, so you go ahead and check that out. But that is the basic mechanics of the insertion, right? You just have it's a very automatic process, right? You just kick this card in, and because your your right middle finger, I don't know why I'm mixing up with my directions, but your right middle finger just kicks this card in, and it's going to be automatically angle jogged. Okay, so that is the insertion. The second method that you can do is just a spectator peek. So I do this very Shin Cobalt-esque high up into the hands spectator peek, but you can do whatever that you want, right? You can do this one if you wish, right? As long as you riffle the card and the spectator can see the identity of the card. This is a horrible deck to do this with because you can't see the pips, but you get the point. So as long as the spectator can see the identity of the card, you get a pinky break underneath of the selection. Your right hand comes over, and now your right hand grips everything above of the break. So now you can slip your pinky deeper into the break, enlarging it. The pad of the pinky contacts the index of the card. So now, if you just extend your pinky finger, this card will automatically kick itself into an angle jog, which means that now you can go ahead and do the DPS. Okay? So that is doing it from a spectator peek. The second thing that you can do is from a spread. Usually when I do the DPS from a spread, that's from a guy known as Paul Khaim. So it's spelled as Chosse. That is still being published, so I won't explain it, but it is a very nice method. Dennis Kim also has another method, which is just a slight variation on the Paul Khaim method. So it's just this. Obviously, I'm not going to teach these, but if you know the DPS and you know spreads enough, you can probably reverse engineer it. There is again, as long as you get like an in jog, then you can get this move down, okay? So you have a card selected, for example. As you replace the spread, you're just going to relax your left middle ring and pinky finger, exposing the pad of these fingers, okay? So when these cards coalesce with the rest of the deck, they're just going to brush against the pad of these fingers, causing this card to stay behind, causing the selection to stay behind, and then these cards are just going to ride on top of this card, meaning that this card is now side jogged. This gives you the perfect opportunity to extend your pinky finger. It extends, and then just kicks this card into an in jog, like so, which means that now your right hand can come over. Okay, that's not good. Your right hand can now come over, and then you can execute the DPS, like so. So that's just a version of the DPS they can do from a spread. The second thing they can do is, well, the fourth thing they can do is from a spread. So you have a card selected, you do a spread, and rather than tapping this card directly flush into the deck, you actually tap it at an angle, like so, right? So now when you do the one-handed fan closure, like so, this card is angle jogged, and now you can execute the DPS. Okay, so when you tap this card into the fan, you're going to tap closer to the left corner, to the top left corner, like so, causing it to swivel around already. So then you could do the one-handed fan closure and then the DPS. Okay, that's the fourth get ready. And then the last one that you can do is actually nowadays my preferred method of doing the DPS. It is a dribble. So you just have a card selected from dribble, right? You show it around. So in this case, it is the 9 of hearts. As you replace this packet back onto the top of the deck, you're just going to relax these fingers. You're going to relax these fingers, exposing the pads of your middle ring and pinky finger. So when these fingers relax, you're going to contact the face of this card about near the center, I would say, or a bit less, or closer to the right side of this card over here. And as you continue, this card is going to swivel around the pinky finger. It's going to swivel outwards like so. Okay, just from pure friction. You don't even need to apply any sort of pressure. So this card swivels around. So now you're left in this sort of position. All right, so this is basically the side still get ready. But you can also use this as a DPS. So now you're just going to proceed on with your regular DPS. You're just going to use your pinky finger to kick this card against the pad of your left thumb, because it is slightly sticking out a bit more. So if you use your pinky finger to kick this card into the pad of your thumb, and then you just execute the DPS as per usual. Okay, so that is how you do the DPS from a dribble, right? Very simple. Sorry, there's a brief stutter there. I kind of missed it. Like so. Right. So that is all the methods of getting a get ready for those are all the get readies for the DPS. But honestly, again, any method of getting an in jog or an angle jog will work. Okay, so it really is no problem. Okay, so let's get okay. So let's go into the basic mechanics of the DPS. I won't go into the original mechanics of the DPS because they're not exactly my favorite. So we're going to start off with the modified version that I prefer, right? The modern version of the DPS. So you're going to start off with a card outjogged in the center of the deck, okay? Next, you're going to go into your diagonal jog, which again, I already taught on this channel, so you can look at that again. So you're going to execute your diagonal jog. Now, one thing you have to notice about this diagonal jog is that my left thumb never moves, because there's no reason for my left thumb to move. My left thumb is fleshy, right? It is not a stiff thing, right? My left thumb can have things pressed into it, meaning that when I execute a diagonal jog, it is still in contact with this corner, and I don't need to move this thumb out and then in, right? So my left thumb can just stay in place this entire time, and I don't even need to do this weird like lifting and then replacing motion, right? So we just do the diagonal jog like so. You're going to remain in control of the card, okay? So now that you have your diagonal jog, what you're doing is hold up. Wait, what was that? Yeah. So when I actually, oh boy, I lost my train of thought. Oh, hello, how's it going? Hello, hope everything's going well. Hello. So after you're done executing the diagonal jog, there should be a couple things that you should note down. So one is that my right middle finger and my left thumb, my right middle finger and my right thumb are actually close to the left corners of this deck over here, right? They're close to the corners of this deck over here, but they're not exactly on the corner. This position is important because this will be necessary for the smoothness of the move. Okay, so do take note that your left thumb and your right thumb and your right middle finger, I have no idea why I'm struggling so much with directions right now, but your right thumb and your right middle finger are close to these left corners over here, okay? The other thing that you should note is that your left ring finger and pinky finger are just sort of relaxed there, okay? So again, like I said, for the diagonal jog, these fingers are just going to relax and they're going to make way for this card to be angle jogged, like so, okay? So that is the diagonal jog. That is where you should be after the diagonal jog, like so, okay? And all of this is hidden by your right hand, like so, okay? Obviously, there's still a corner sticking out, but there really is no issue because your ring finger and your pinky finger are going to be hiding that, okay? So now the main point of this is that this card over here, this angle jog card, is now being contacted by 2 points. The 2 points are your thumb and your middle finger, okay? So those are basically the only two parts that are contacting this selection over here. Actually, you know, I'll do it face up. So these 2 fingers are the only parts that are contacting this card. Your thumb is contacting the upper left corner of this card, and your middle finger is contacting the upper portion of this card over here, like so. Okay? And the rest of your fingers are just relaxed and hanging around this angle jogged card, right? Now you're going to do 2 things. You're going to move your right hand forward, and you're going to move your left hand backwards just a touch, all right? So the majority of this move is going to be a right hand forward motion and just a touch of a left hand backward motion, right? So when you execute this move, you're going to notice that everything happens kind of automatically. So when you start moving your right hand forward and your left hand backwards, notice how, because of pure friction, this card is going to start to get dragged backwards. It's going to start to drag backwards, and notice how this card slowly gets more and more swiveled out and more angle jogged. And you're going to continue moving the deck forward and moving your left hand backwards until you can no longer do that. So you just sort of feel this card hit your right thumb over here, okay? Like so. So now you're in this exaggerated angle jog position. But don't worry, because your right hand will hide the majority of this motion over here, the majority of this exposed action over here, okay? So now that you have this card in this exact position over here, you're going to continue this forward motion with the deck and this backward motion with your left hand. And now what's going to happen is the selection is now trapped by these fingers over here, right? The left hand, the top left corner is still being contacted by the left thumb. But now what's happening is that you're just going to apply a slight bit of pressure with your pinky finger to trap this card by the long edges. So your left pinky finger is contacting the right long edge of this card, while the left long edge over here is contacting the right thumb over here. So now these 2 fingers are the ones that are in control of this card over here, okay? So as you continue to move this card, this deck forward and this left hand backwards, you're going to realize that because these 2 points are the only fingers contacting this card, you're going to realize that this card over here is going to start swiveling around your thumb. All right, so it's going to swivel around your thumb, and you're going to continue until you reach this position over here. Okay, so now that you have this position, this is exactly where you want the card to be. Okay, so if you get this position, then you know that you're on the right track. You're going to further continue your forward motion, and you're going to further continue your backwards motion with your left hand. And as you do that, now this card is going to swivel outwards even more, like so. Okay? Which means that now the bottom left corner is pointed towards the fat of my thumb. And now my left ring finger is also resting near the bottom, the top right corner of this card. So this should be where this card is currently at. Okay, if my camera would focus. So this is where your hand should be currently at, like so. Okay, this is all of course hidden beneath under the right hand, like so. And you're basically already in palm already, right? If you just apply a slight bit of pressure with your left ring finger and you press this card against the fat of your thumb, you basically already have a card palmed in your left hand. But you don't want to fully put it into palm just yet, right? This card is still relatively straight and still relatively like on the same plane as the deck, okay? So you're going to continue this forward motion and this backward motion with your left hand until this card clears the deck. So once this card clears the deck, like so, that's when you can apply more pressure with your ring finger and buckle this card into a palm, like so. Okay. And I'll tell you why you can't bend this card fully until it's clear from the deck a bit later on into the tip section. But just know that this card should be relatively straight until the last moment, then you place it into palm. Okay. So once the card clears the deck and this card is into a full palm, you're going to continue this forward motion, and you're either going to like table this deck, or you're going to hand it out for it to be shuffled. While your left hand, the rest of your fingers just curl in, right? They curl in and they go into this Guy Hollingworth position, like so. Okay. So now this card basically conforms to the shape of your hand, like so, right? So this is all done in one smooth motion. So you have a card selected, you execute the DPS, and then you slightly just retract your hands, like so. Okay. And that is the general motions of the DPS. Yeah, I mean, it really is mechanically like automatic, right? Everything just sort of swivels and clicks into place. Okay. So here are just a couple of tips to make the DPS function properly. So the key to this palm is that there's literally no need to flex any of your fingers besides your left ring finger, okay? The rest of your fingers throughout this entire process are just relaxed off to the side, okay? So when I do any of these motions, because the move is already automatic, I have no reason to apply any sort of pressure onto this card over here, right? Because everything just clicks into place. The only reason why I need to flex the ring finger is to place this card into palm, right? So the only finger that really does have any sort of tension is the ring finger, which is just boop. It just curls in and places this card into a full palm, okay? So that is the only finger that will have any sort of tension. All right. So if you just relax your hand and just let the ring finger palm the card, you will have no problem with this move, because, well, one of the reasons why people tend to get that scooping motion when they do a DPS. So if you notice that if I flex my fingers, you'll have this weird grabbing motion, right? You look like a Lego man trying to grab a card. But if you just flex your ring finger, you remove that problem. All right. So throughout this entire palm, relaxation is the key. The second tip I have for people who are doing the super similar to Dennis Kim's DPS, it's also, there's a couple of people who have a DPS that's similar to this. All right, so I know Jack Thai. I don't know how to pronounce his name. He's a I believe he's a London magician, has one that's similar as well. Andrew Frost also does it with the ring finger as well. So there's a couple of people that actually do this as well. So yeah, it's I think people just realize that it's just not optimal if you extend your ring finger and then palm if you extend this pinky and then place it back into a palm, because that's a lot of motion, right? You have to re-extend your pinky and then place into palm. So it's like, well, why would we ever do that if the ring finger is already in place, right? If the ring finger is already in place, then if we just apply pressure, then the move is already in palm. There's no reason to really extend this pinky finger and place it into palm. So I think that's where a lot of people who study the DPS actually tend to go towards, because it's just like the logical like step into it. And a ring finger palm isn't necessarily like that unique either, right? We've seen quite a lot of people actually pull that off throughout the years. So yeah, and yes, I am aware of Dennis's DPS. But yes, I do a more John Galsworthy DPS nowadays, so that is something that I am happy with. So yeah. But the second tip that I have for you for the DPS is that if you hear a click when the card clears the deck, that's because you're fully palming the card too early, causing it to bend, and then this card will have to snap off of the deck to really clear the deck, okay? So throughout this entire process, when the card clears the deck, so throughout this entire process, as you execute the DPS, you want this card to be on the same plane as the rest of the deck, right? That's why I told you that this card shouldn't be fully palmed until it is clear from the deck. Because if you attempt to fully palm this card, it will bend this card, causing this gap, and this card will have to snap off of the deck, causing that click, okay? So if you do the DPS, just apply enough pressure to hold this card in place, and once this card clears, that's when you apply more pressure to put it into a full palm, like so, okay? So that is the second tip for you if you have a click when you have when you do the DPS, okay? Now, if you're afraid of the angles of this move, it's a relatively easy fix, right? So generally, the DPS is best seen from the left side, all right? So you would have to see it from this angle off to the side, like so, okay? Which is not optimal, because why would you ever tilt your body if that happens, right? If you execute a DPS, why would you ever want to shift your body off to the side just to have the optimal angle? It just doesn't make sense for any sort of external reality, unless you're handing out the deck for a spectator on your right side to shuffle or whatever, right? So that is generally not optimal, but there is a method to reduce the knuckle flash for one. There's also a method to solve that angle issue, to constantly provide that ideal angle. Oh, hello from South Korea. Oh, nice. Hello. Glad to have people dropping by from all over the world. But yes, so an easy fix for the DPS, for the knuckle flash, and for the angle issue is just, rather than shifting your entire body, why don't you just shift the plane of the deck, right? If you just shift the deck, so then it's no longer parallel with the floor. If it's now perpendicular with the floor, just like so, now you have, well, now for one, the optimal angle is now pointed towards the spectator's eyesight. The second thing is that because your fingers are pointed towards the ground, when you execute the DPS, you won't get that knuckle flash as much, right? Because these fingers are pointed towards the ground, so people won't see, if you ever have one, this scooping motion, right? Which preferably you shouldn't. But if you want to reduce it, if you just hold the deck perpendicular with the ground, you'll be able to avoid having that knuckle flash to be shown while still having that optimal angle, right, for the spectator. So that is another fix for the DPS. And this one is a small tip. So throughout the entire move, your left thumb is constantly contacting the left long edge of this deck over here, from the insertion all the way to when this card clears the deck, right? So throughout this entire process, it never leaves the side of the deck, right? So there should be no weird wiggle of the thumb, because I know when I see some DPSs on social media, some people tend to do like this or whatever. So your left thumb, as it extends throughout this move, should be able to brush against your right thumb, okay? So it just goes from here all the way until it brushes against the right thumb, and then you execute the DPS, okay? So throughout this entire process, your left thumb never leaves this deck, never leaves the left long edge, okay? Because if you have any sort of wiggle, that is very indicative that there is something that is wrong, okay? This next tip is from, this other small tip is from Erdnase himself. So apparently there's a chance that this card can actually buckle in the wrong direction, which I don't even, that's never happened to me, but apparently there is a chance that this card will buckle in the wrong direction. So Erdnase says that if this actually happens to you, when you execute the DPS, just apply a slight bit of pressure with your left pinky finger, causing this card to buckle in the correct direction. So when you execute the DPS, there's no chance of this card just popping in the opposite direction. Now your pinky finger assures that this card bends into your palm instead, okay? So that is directly from Erdnase. And then the last tip that I have for the DPS is that you can actually delay the DPS, which I know most people don't really like to do, but there is something that's very, very interesting about delaying the DPS, okay? So if you have your card selected, which is the Ace of Diamonds, if you have the card selected, you angle jog this card, and you just fully pull it back like so. This serves as a squaring action, right? But now what this means is that you can actually separate both hands. So now you have the deck in the right hand bill grip and your left hand is free. So you can speak, you can do whatever that you need, and you can just relax, right? And when you're ready, the left hand can come back over and you can execute the rest of the DPS, right? So you can do basically like half moves, right? You don't have to do the DPS in one fell swoop. So this means that if someone is ever burning your hands or you don't feel comfortable with the DPS, and this means that now you can execute the get ready for the DPS, you can talk, you can misdirect the audience, and when you're ready, and when you see that everyone's like fully no longer burning your hands, then you can execute the DPS, right? So delaying the DPS is something that you can use to your advantage, which most people don't really do. So you can execute the DPS with a delay, okay? So let's discuss the original write-up for the DPS. So there's a couple of interesting things that I want to touch on, especially comparing this current iteration versus the original iteration of the DPS. So the DPS was originally done with an insertion, but the way the insertion was done was actually kind of interesting. So Erdnase tells you to actually kick the upper right corner of this card to the left with your pinky finger as you square up this card, which is sort of interesting, right? He would then tell you to use your right index finger to further kick this card down, like so. And then, once it was down enough, you would then move your index finger away and then use your left thumb to kick the upper left corner flush with the rest of the deck, causing this angle over here, okay? So this is a very interesting insertion, right? This is very, very interesting because it's interesting. You have so much finger motion, right? You have so much finger motion. You have this, right? It's interesting to see how much the DPS has changed over the years. But the problem is I still see people doing this, right? Which is such a weird thing because this issue can be easily solved if you learn a proper diagonal jog, right? So that's just an interesting thing that I found. That's just an interesting thing that I found regarding the DPS and the original insertion that Erdnase actually used, right? The second thing that I found pretty interesting to discuss is that in the original write-up, the ending position was actually kind of interesting. So you would actually just move the deck slightly forward and then your left hand slightly backwards. So now when I touch you guys the DPS, it would be a full tabling action, right? It would be a full tabling action, or it would be handing the deck out, right? In the original write-up, Erdnase actually tells you to actually just go into the DPS, and once this card clears, you're just going to shift the deck back up. You're going to palm this card, and then you're going to clip the bottom left corner of this deck with your index finger and your left thumb, like so. Okay, so now you're left in this position, like so. All right, so you have this position over here, right? Which is a weird thing, right? This is a pretty weird little ending position to end on. But then Erdnase says something else. Erdnase says, quote, "By the ordinary movement, the right hand makes in passing the deck to be shuffled." So this is after you have this. So I assume by what he means by this is that once you have this card, once you have this deck in this position, your right hand would come over and then it would hand this deck outwards, which is sort of an interesting thing because you can just sort of skip over this last position by just going into it straight away and then handing the deck out to be shuffled in a right hand bill grip, right? There's not really any reason for you to put this deck in this position and then regrip it and then hand it out again. I don't know why that's I don't know why that's a quote from Erdnase, but apparently it is. But Shane Cobalt actually has a much better handling of this clip position over here, which I won't go into, but it's because it's over on his Patreon. But just know that he has a much better handling for getting rid of this deck when he has it in this position over here, okay? So you can go ahead and check that out. The third thing that I want to note of interest in the original write-up is that Erdnase also has some very interesting variations of the DPS, right? The first thing that he notes is that you can actually use it as a multiple card palm, which is basically the same thing, right? It's the same thing as the original DPS, right? The only difference is when you execute the diagonal jog, you might need to apply a bit more pressure with your left thumb and your left middle finger to anchor everything in place. Because if you don't apply more pressure, you might have a chance of these other cards just following along with these other cards, which is something that you don't want, okay? And now once you have these cards in position, you just execute the DPS as per usual. And then that's the DPS with multiple cards, right? The second variation that Erdnase actually makes use of, or talks about, is actually a top palm. So if you want to do a DPS use with the top card, it's just going to be a relatively simple thing. So again, your right hand is over the deck in a bill grip. Your left pinky finger wraps around the deck, and the pad of the pinky is just going to contact this top corner of this bottom right corner of this card. So now when you pull this pinky slightly off to the right, this card becomes angle jogged, which means that now this corner can clear this thumb and you can execute the DPS with the top card like so. Okay, so that's just a pretty interesting handling of the DPS, which I don't know why you would ever do this, because quite frankly, there's also the lowy palm, which I think is a much better handling of a top card bottom palm. So this is just a very weird way to get into a bottom palm, but it is an option if you ever wish that you could do a DPS with your top card, which is, I don't know why, right? And then the last variation that Erdnase makes note of is actually a bottom palm. So you're holding the entire deck in your left hand, in your right hand, like so. You're just gonna curl in your pinky finger so that the tip of it just contacts the upper left, the bottom right corner of this card over here. So now when you extend this pinky over here, this causes this card to actually become angle jogged like so, okay? Which means that now you can do a DPS with the bottom card, all right? But for this one, you might need to hold the deck a bit deeper into your right hand, okay? So now I don't really hold the deck at my fingertips. I have to hold it a bit deeper into my right hand. The reason for that is if I'm actually holding the deck at my fingertips, if I execute the DPS with the bottom card, I might have, there's a chance that this card can actually just slip off of my thumb and just kick away, which is something that's not exactly ideal. So if you're planning to do a bottom card DPS, preferably you would have this deck deeper into your right hand, and then you will be able to swivel this card without any fear of it just popping away, okay? And that is the DPS as a bottom palm. All right, now if you're interested in reading more about the DPS, there's obviously a lot of resources, too many resources on the DPS. There is the Expert Card Table by SW Erdnase. There you can read up the original write-up. You can also watch the Diagonal Palm Shift by Ricky Smith, Carney on the Diagonal Palm Shift by John Carney, the Diagonal Palm Shift video by Jason England, Ephemera by Dennis Kim, The Art of Palming by Ben Earl, and there's also Lint's Pocket Stuff for Magicians by John Luca. There he talks about the Paul Kelsey DPS. So the Paul Kelsey DPS is the thing that I didn't really explain. It's doing the DPS from a spread in one really smooth motion. So that is a very, very nice move, and I highly recommend that you check up on that book because there's a lot of good material in it. Okay. Alright, so final thoughts. So I know that nobody really watches until the very end, but that gives me one final opportunity to really slip in one last thing over here, right? So in the 3rd edition of Expert Card Technique, there is a move called the bilateral side steal by Dr. Jacob Daly. This is not a... I know Dr. Jacob Daly says, yeah, this is like such a good move. You can use this, right? This is practical. But I think that this is a move monkey move. This is definitely a move monkey move. So here's what the bilateral side steal is. You're going to execute a side steal and then a DPS in quick succession. So you have one pinky break near the bottom of the deck, and you also have a ring finger break above of the pinky break, like so, okay? So your right hand is covering the entire deck, like so, okay? So you're gonna slip in your your ring finger deeper into the break, and you're just gonna contact this top card with the pad of your ring finger. So when you extend this ring finger, this card is just going to go along for the ride. It's just going to be kicked out into an angle jog, like so. And you're just going to continue this motion until you can side steal it, which again, I taught on this channel, so you can go ahead and check out the side steal video. So now you can have this card side stealed, right? And now you're going to side steal this card, and you're going to place it in full palm, and you're going to return back to the original position that it was already or before, okay? So now that it's in this position, what you're going to do now is you're going to stick your your left pinky finger deeper into the break. The pad of the pinky finger is going to contact the top of this card, and it's just going to kick this card outwards like so, causing an angle jog, okay? Which means that now you can then execute the DPS. So now you have one card palmed in both hands. This one is the first selection and this one is the second selection. Which I have no idea what you would even do with this. I assume that you would just do this for card to pocket, I guess. But yes, so essentially this entire move is meant to be done as a sort of twofold action. So the side steal is meant to be done as a squaring action of the deck. You would then execute the DPS as a means of handing the deck out for someone to shuffle, and your left hand just drops off to your side. And yeah, that's the bilateral side steal, which is a very interesting move. I would never get myself to this position. The worst case scenario, if I ever need to palm two cards, is if I ever need to palm two cards in either hands, is that I would just control it to the bottom and control it to the top, and then I would just execute like a bottom palm and then a one-handed top palm, right? I think that's so much simpler than doing all of this. But again, if you feel like practicing it, go ahead and practice it, but it's not really my cup of tea for this move, right? So yeah, that is the bilateral side steal, which yeah, if you watch until the very end, you get to see that. But yeah, that was it for the Palming Livestream Lecture series. I just thought it would be a good way to end it off with the DPS because it's pretty much a poster boy of palming moves, right? This is such an iconic palming move that if you ever want someone to if you want like a good palming like thumbnail or move to really describe or have like a good shot of, the DPS is your go-to because of just how there's just something about the DPS which just looks so mechanically interesting and it just looks so nice to look at. All right, so that is the DPS. But for the next series of moves that we're going to go over for the live streams, we are going to go over switches. So that is going to be that. All right. So yeah, but that's going to be it for me today. Yeah, thanks for joining me on this ride of Palming Livestream Lecture series. It has been, I think it's been 6 months by now, half a year since I've started this series. So that's going to be, yeah, we're going to wrap this up. But yeah, thank you for teaching. Super strange double palm, yeah, for sure. Thank you for teaching, yeah, for sure. Thank you for hanging out. Yeah, hope everyone stays safe and healthy. And yeah, that'll be it for me. All right, see you guys, and take care, and yeah.